My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Nyanis. Today I'm going to cover a very important quote by Mahan that talks about this universal dimension of the big I, or the universal thought that we all generate and part of that continuum. So I'm going to take this very important quote that all of us have seen in Mahan's book. I've also heard Mahan speak, and you've also heard me say several times. Like the last time, I will give the Tamil version, and then I will then go into the English translation so that people who are non-Tamil speaking will be able to understand and appreciate, and also get that wisdom knowledge from this important quote by Mahan. So moving forward, this quote is a very important quote which Mahan always says, and this has a very powerful meaning. So let me start with this quote, which is talks about the universal identity. So there are 5 lines to this. I'll take you through one by one of the lines and then bring it all together. So the first one is actually here. Let me give you the full quote and then I'll go one by one. So this one, he says, "Yettada tatparatai etti etti utpuramai undru sendru," going within, "utru noka noka apparamum ipparamum ega paraparamum ennul nanadiden." A very simple 5-line quote. And it is very powerful, and you'll see what this means in English. So let's explore this. The first one is essentially, it says "Yettada tatparate." So that means, what is "Yettada tatparate"? In English means that the inaccessible, unreachable abode of this universality. So he's talking about the abode of universality. So here he says the "Yettada tatparate." So he says that the inaccessible, unreachable abode that all of us have heard about it, read about it, this, unreachable abode that Swamiji calls the universal peace sanctuary. And he says that, this abode, many people, is written in many, many scriptures, thousands of years, by many great saints and sages, and he says that this abode seemed to be, unreachable or unattainable, this notion of universality, because we are so caught up with this dimension, our dimension, the 4 dimensions, and the limitedness, that we are unable to attain this unlimitedness. Our mind is so focused on that, material, universe, we are unable to see that, the universe that is transcendental to this materiality. So this human mind continuously searches and seeks this, inaccessible, unreachable abode. It says the "Yettada tatparate." See, the next part, the question is that why is it that it is not accessible? Why aren't we not able to access this universal identity? And we see that is because this universal identity or personality is, devoid of form, devoid of color, devoid of, limitedness. And our mind is so wedded and welded to materiality, to limitedness, to that shrunkenness, a limited perspective of life. So to decouple that, to break away from that gravity, many find it very, very difficult. So he says that as long as we are fully awake in this material world, we will miss that, this abode of this universal peace sanctuary becomes unattainable or inaccessible or unreachable. So here then he goes on to, explain that we all crave for this universal identity. Now we know this is really important, but yet we find it very difficult. we have that desire to do this, to attain this, but we don't put in enough effort to be able to access this. So we see that, we reach out, we look out, you know, and we see the material world, but we see the material world with a material lens. So we reach out, many of us, most human, beings, at some point in their life, they start reflecting, like, what is this all about? So again, that, and there comes a stage where, many struggle to make sense of what life is about. And here we see that many scriptures, and even Mahan says that they're reaching out for the truth is actually that true universal identity, that truth that's unchanging. And we know that the unchanging substratum in all of us, many know it theoretically, but very few know it in practice. And in this quote, Mahan takes us step by step on how this inaccessible, unreachable abode can be reached. So he himself, so he's here in this quote, he's documenting his own struggles. He says, "Yetada tatparate." He too longed for it, wanting to achieve this universality, or this understanding God in its entirety, and it became a kind of a full pursuit for him. He says, this is to find this is the search for the truth, that unchanging substratum. But I'm seeing all changes, changing things, and I'm unable to grapple with this. So in his first quote, he says, "Yetada tatparate." The next part is very important. He says, "Etti etti utpuramai undru sendre." So he said, I tried and tried and tried, viewed everything from external, and I started going deep inside me. You see? So he says that I attempted, attempted and attempted, and I realized that I have to go within me. And he says that. So he says this ceaseless subjective inward search. This is what. So he says that, iti iti utpuramai, he says, I went within me, ulle sendred, and he says, I saw everything, but I could not attain it. So I decided to search ceaselessly. I couldn't find it in the object world. So I pursued a different course of action, which is ceaselessly, pursuing the subject that is viewing all this object. That inward search was very, very important. He says, then the question that is, how was the inward search? How did he take that inward search? There are many, many practices. There are many, many people he asked. Many of them showed him different, ways, and, from bhakti to everything else. So he pursued all that, and yet he could not, attain that abode of universal peace sanctuary, the subject, right? And he started pushing the boundaries of knowledge deeper and deeper, until one fine day, he discovered that inner force that manifests as the universal identity, or the universal personality, or the universal peace sanctuary, manifests as everything. So that inner search took him to many, many practices. And one fine practice was that one of the master's elderly person showed him a method to reconnect back to his subject. And from then onwards, Mahan started pursuing that intensively. Again, what was shown to him was just a very basic step, but he went deeper and deeper. He says that, that ceaseless search, he discovered that Kundalini meditation, this universal peace sanctuary manifests, or what he calls the big I, or in some scriptures, they talk about consciousness or supreme consciousness. Through this inward search, he was able to transform the mind to be able to realize its true self through the practice of this Kundalini meditation. So that Kundalini meditation enabled him a vehicle for him to be able to transition from that material world, from that external world, to plunge into a more inner journey that starts unraveling the entire secret of the universe. So he says, that this meditation was critical. And not only that, when he started practicing this Kundalini meditation, something very interesting started happening. So he discovered the forehead, concentrating on the forehead, the nape eye, and the top eye. And there was a amazing electricity that was transforming his entire body, mind, intellect, and the neural connectivity is fully awakened. When that happens, that magnify that became the vibration that continuously silenced that material vibrations. Ultimately, the only vibration that was there was that vibration of the Unarvu, or what Swamiji calls as the universal vibration that emanates within every particle, everything in this universe, including all of us. The mind became so quiet that is able to, resonate with the same symphony as this universal force. And he realized that, by knowing this, he started making sense of everything in this universe, everything, this oneness, everything, this universal. And that universal peace sanctuary is not outside. It's not, anywhere else except within all of us. So by practicing this, he was able to, slowly quieten and fold that material, realm into his spiritual identity, which is essentially what was unraveling everything, which he did not, in the early part, did not understand. But through this subjective search, he was able to understand how the entire material world awakens and how it goes back to sleep. And in that process, he was able to discover his own spiritual compass. He calls it the big eye, and he's able to discover that which gives rise to everything. So, and he was able to make sense of religious teachings, the spiritual self-realization pilgrimage, and using the pillars of scientific reasoning and logic to be able to make sense of all the things that is happening. That is only possible through that inward subjective search. So he was starting to, as the neural, pathways became more and more stronger and less troubled by the material identity, major highways of enlightenment was building within himself that gave him better understanding, better management, and better control of his own spiritual compass that enabled him to navigate this journey in a much more easier way. So this ceaseless subjective search was critical. So he gives that in the second line. And this is the part that is really important. He says that utru utru noka nokas. Now that he understood things, he realized that it had to be done with, intensive, observing the vibration intensively with absolute focus. There's no distractions at all from this material world. There's no excuses, that, I have no time and all those things. Everything became intensive. That vibration was magnified in every facet of his thoughts, experiences, with precision and intensity. So every thought was examined, scrutinized, and reinvigorated with this universal vibration. Somewhat like, if you see, I'm not sure whether many of you all have done this. If you're a novice that is trying to put a thread in a needle, and you want to be successful in doing that, you have to have absolute solid concentration. And this is exactly Mahan did, was that he was determined to discover this universal peace sanctuary through this Kundalini meditation. Like someone gave him this tool, this spiritual compass. He started using it, like connecting, that needle with that thread, the needle with this precision of, being able to do something productive, but linking his life force, the thread of life, to that needle, which, was the precision, sharp, focused mind with the thread of his life. And when that intensity took place, he was able to connect the two. Yes, he says that to attain that connectivity, that oneness, one needs to become like this young child that is trying to connect that to put through that thread into that needle, that intensive focus through the third eye, through the Netrikan, through the Uchi, and also the Perikan, and also the Mooladharam. The intensity is somewhat like what this child is doing, without taking the eyes from that, the aspiration to connect the two, that spiritual realm with our material, body. So that intensive focus is very important. And when he did that, when that connection took place, when the thread was able to get in and link up with that sharpness of the mind, something very interesting happened. He says, Apparamum, Ipparabum, Ega Paraparamum. What does he mean? He says the external universe, the inner universe, and the entire cosmos, he was able to cognize. He says, I understood the material universe. I understand where the existence of this material universe comes from. I understand the inner cosmos that makes me, that gives me cognition, that gives me consciousness, and the interaction between the two. That precision, that utru noko noko is what revealed the subtleties of that universe that lies within, that magnifies everything that you see outside. And somewhat like this, that you're able to now see things with greater, beauty and awesomeness, that interwoven between what's outside and inside. And sometimes you can't see the separation between the inner universe and the external universe. The awesome beauty of the inner universe manifests as the external universe. The awesome beauty of the mind that is inspired by this, universal peace sanctuary emanates that entire universal peace sanctuary outside. So you see that interconnection becomes more clearer. You are able to link things up. You're able to make sense of your life. You're able to see how how the thread is now interwoven with the needle. You're able to see how the thread of life is interwoven with the sharpness and the precision of that intellect that is able to decipher, that is able to, weave, the thread and needle weaves multiple cloth and seams and so on. In that same way, when the life force is connected with the sharp, precise intellect that is probing, it is able to seamlessly weave both the external and the internal universe as that one universe. Apparamum, Ipparamum, Ega Paraparamum is interwoven by this thread of life. And finally, he says that all this, Yennul Nan Arinden, he says, from this, that interwovenness, realize all of it emanates, I discovered in me. This is very important. It's not that I discovered in me. It says that that consciousness, that infiniteness, that big I, that supreme personality discovered in me. So I realized that I and me are the same thing. And he says that, now I see that the entire universe is part and parcel of me. I discovered that I in me. He says, Yennul Nan Arinden. I understood who I am. I understood who the personality is. So we see that in these 5 lines, Swamiji walks us through beautifully that how that search, that thirst, Swamiji will say sometimes in Tamil, Kudal pasi, udal pasi, ullatin pasi. He says that, we human beings, have hunger for food. The moment you have food, the hunger is gone. You're able to dissipate it. Then you have other pleasures of life, and whether it's procreation or others, you get married and you have relationships and you have all the other, you can fulfill that. He says, Ullatin pasi. Ullatin pasi is actually the inner search, as he say, he says, that search to know who I am, what I am, that search to understand the truth, that thirst can never be filled by a material, pursuit. It has to be a subjective pursuit. And he says that when we pursue that subjective with intensity, that utru tru noka noka, and decipher everything in our mind, as I covered in the last satsang, you know, what is the intellect, what is the mind, what is the memory, how is the process, decipher everything to know how these thoughts are generated, where it comes from. So that's what utru tru noka noka is, to really understand the processes that is generating all these experiences. And he says that when you do that, you know, when the precision mind and intellect is interwoven with our life force, we see that we're able to make sense about the internal cosmos and the external cosmos. And finally, you see that they are not separate. They actually seamlessly stitched together as one. They're actually one. And he says, in no nana rinden. Says, I discovered all this is a manifestation of me. So a few things that, you know, we all, number one, we need to have that thirst. Number two is that we need to have the discipline to intensively follow through. And number three is that putting it to practice. You see, as I mentioned in one of my WhatsApp spiritual forum, for Mahan, the philosophy is the practice. For many people, the philosophy remains theoretical. In Mahan's case, the philosophy of this I God is actually a practice. So we see that in this context, I've walked through with you, this I God state that Mahan talks about is none other than, you know, this pursuit that, you know, that to attain that I God state, one has to understand that this state cannot be reached with anything material. No material things will give you that abode. No material things will be able to give you access to this material, to this, you know, universal realization. You can do all the rituals you want. You will not attain it until and unless the mind, you know, is absorbed in its subjective state. And he says that knowing that the thirst, one needs to have the thirst, the etada tatpartaya, seeking this wanting to know this truth. And one needs to dovetail that with the ceaseless subjective search. You know, you have to keep attempting and attempting. Yes, you'll fall down. It's okay. Get up and do it. You know, you have to be consistent. As I always say, to attain this universal peace sanctuary, you need to have patience, perseverance, persistence, and you see that this and the practice is very important. That yetti utpuramai, ulusendre, you have to go within yourself. It says that patience, persistence are very important. And then the inquiring mind, always asking, why is this? How is this? So the word PEACE is that the first set of P's I've given you. E is actually the inquiring mind. Why is this? How is this? Decoupling from the dogmatic belief. You get this, somebody says, okay, this is what the scripture says this. Really? Can I experience this? What do I need to do to experience this? Everybody talks about bliss and silencing the mind. How do I do this? So this pursuit is really important, the inquiring mind. And when you do that, when you take a deep sense of wanting to know and pursue it properly with completeness and wholesomeness, that inquiring mind starts getting that third door opening up, which is within the peace, the awareness. It is no more theoretical. It is actually an experience. And this is what the measure of thought is. And when that happens, the C, which is your concentration power, is intensified. And ultimately, the last door opens up is an enlightened. This is what enlightenment, PEACE. So that starts with the yetti utpuramai, that, you have to go within yourself, the ceaseless inward search. And it has to be done intensively, intensively. And here I want to tell you that how the small child is trying to put that thread in the needle. If every day you're able to link up your life force to that intellect and the mind and, the sharp intensity, you see that after a while, initially it's very difficult, but after a while it becomes so easy. You should see some of the experienced tailors do this. One go, they get it, right? Because the mind is so sharp. In that same way, yes, in the first few instances, you may not get that, connection. But as you intensify, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, by the time you hit 10 years, it becomes one, it becomes connected. And when that happens, you see that, wow, what you experience is phenomenal. That's why I always say is that awareness, that inspiration, that universal, the moksha field. This is where the aparamum, iparamum, ega paraparamum, that entire cosmos that is weaved becomes one. And this is where the spiritual compass is so important. You are guided by this inner, self. It has got its own direction. This in its universe, everything is seen with that universal spiritual compass. And ultimately, one attains that, I am that. I discovered in me. So, in this body, in this mind, in this intellect, something has interwoven it to give it consciousness, reality, experience, and meaning. And that is none other than that I that manifests everywhere in this universe, in every person, in every being, in every entity that is embedded in it. And that is what this I God philosophy is. Sandosham.